In part 4, we'll cover and explore other options, like how to handle a situation that requires us to use CosmosDB with the Mongo API. In part 4, we'll be focusing on the areas highlighted in red, as this scenario will require us to leverage Azure functions and to optionally expose a custom connector. What if I want to use a scenario that's requiring me to use the CosmosDB with Mongo API? Can I use any of the connectors that ship with the product? So let me cover this. So there are some important things that you need to be aware of. First and foremost, the CosmosDB Connector, which is a premium connector, it only supports using CosmosDB with SQL API. Also, the third-party MongoDB connector, it only supports using the managed version of MongoDB, which is Atlas. So you can't use it if you're planning on using the Mongo API with CosmosDB. So what does this mean? This means you need to either use a custom connector or an HTTP request action, and you need to create an API that leverages the Mongo client to expose these capabilities. So what's required? So first and foremost, you create an API that has the proper CRUD operations that are needed for your scenario. Then you'll need to expose that API so it can be called through the Power Platform. And in our case, I'll be demonstrating how to do this with the function app and APIM. And what you'll want to do is you want to add the function app to APIM so we can export the open API definition, because the open API definition will be used to create the custom connector. Now, this third step is not needed if you're just planning to use the HTTP action to call your API. CosmosDB Connector does not have support for the Mongo Wire Protocol. Here's a quick way to allow support for the Mongo API for Logic Apps and Power Platform. I've chosen to use an Azure function to expose an API that can provide CRUD operations for the Mongo Wire Protocol. In block 1, I have the configure function in which I create a singleton for the Mongo client, which results in better performance. In block 2, we have the HTTP trigger, and this is where we create the document in CosmosDB. In block 3, we create the interface for the API, and in this example, I'm only using create_doc. In block 4, we implement the logic for the interface. You can then expose this via APIM and also wrap it in a custom connector. That concludes part 4, and in part 5, we will create a custom connector using the Azure function that we just created.